Arrested for discussing politics, the brief detention of a prominent French-Egyptian journalist raises more questions about the decline of personal rights and freedoms in post-revolution Egypt. So what kind of society is this country turning into under the leadership of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. The French-Egyptian journalist Alain Gresh says he was questioned by police in Cairo after a woman in a cafe heard him talking about politics. Gresh says he and two other journalists were questioned in the street outside the cafe for an hour and a half. And on Sunday, a student was arrested at Cairo University. The police say it was because he was filming without permission. But initial reports suggested it was because he was carrying a copy of George Orwell's novel 1984. The Twitter sphere jumped on the connection, and Orwell started trending, with critics comparing modern-day Egypt to the dystopian world of 1984. And of course, Al Jazeera's journalists remain in prison in Egypt on false charges. Peter Grester, Mohammed Fahmy and Baha Mohammed have now been detained in Egypt for more than 300 days. Joining us for today's discussion, here with me in the studios, Yahya Khanem, Egyptian journalist and fellow at the City University in New York. But first, let's talk to Alain Gresh, the editor of Le Monde Diplomatique. He joins us on the line from Cairo. I'm delighted that you were allowed to be freed and are in a position to talk to us. Tell us what happened.
So, I was in a cafe in the center of the town, near the British Embassy, discussing with two editorialist and woman in a small cafe, and there was around the cafe is very small, and there was a lady sitting at the table beside us, and after 15 minutes she left and said loudly, "You want to break up the country, you want to defame the country." Okay, we didn't respond, of course, but after that, when we get out, we were stopped by the police, and they took our passport and saying, "What are you doing here? And do you have permission?" etc., etc. They came asking the same question. Look, to be very frank, for me, the most important thing of this event is not the fact that I was interrogated by the police, but the fact that a woman which had nothing to do with it, which was not police clearly, denouncing people speaking at a table nearby. This...
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. What do you think it suggests about what is happening in Egypt right now? And do you think she ratted on you because of fear? Look,
there is a climate in Egypt which makes the most important question, the struggle against terrorism. Who is not with us is against us, and we are the target of all the world which is against Egypt. And all this is creating among a part of the citizens the feeling that there are enemies of Egypt everywhere, and first of all, the journalists are enemies.
Do you think Egyptians, or certainly some of them, are happy to have their freedoms curtailed to do this for the state, to help as far as its security is concerned?
No, of course. Now the situation is very particular. There is all the media speaking about this war against terror, and people are interrogating themselves, and there is a very big difference among the generation. The young people understand that this is propaganda, but I think a part of the population is responding to this call from the government.
Yes, do you think that this woman who told on you, is this what the government wants future Egyptians to be like? Could she be the blueprint for the new Egyptians?
I'm not sure I got the question. I hear very badly. But this woman, Egyptian, she was very well dressed, and I think she was high bourgeoisie because, again, this cafe was in the center of the town, an expensive cafe, and I think she really feels that it's her duty to do this sort of thing. And this is frightening when the citizens in the street think that their duty to fight against journalists, it's a problem. But I must add something which we were stopped for 1 hour and a half in the afternoon, but then at 6 o'clock I got a phone call from the Minister of Interior. They sent me a car, and I went there, and they apologized and saying it was an error, etc., etc. But somebody told me, I haven't checked, that on NBC, the guy speaking in the name of the Minister of Interior said that it was a normal checking and it has nothing abnormal, which is not what I was told in the Interior Minister.
Okay, interesting. Tell me something. I know that you're fluent in Arabic and you probably take in many of the talk shows that are on daily or nightly. What sort of impact do you think it'll have on Egypt when you constantly have this message that you've got to look after the state, that you've got to effectively tittle-tale on your fellow citizens, your family?
You know, it's. I think it's very strange because you can say that all these measures are completely counterproductive from the point of view of the regime, because it's creating enemies among the journalists. It's creating a hostility to this government from the international opinion. So I don't think it's rational. Even if we accept the government as it is and its policy, it's in some ways I believe their own propaganda that Egypt is the target of all the world, and we must be careful because there are enemies everywhere, etc., etc.
Tell us what it is that you would like to see happening now, what you feel should happen now in order to put a stop to this, make Egypt more democratic.
The most important thing, I think, is to open the media and the press. I mean, now there are little dissident voices. Not only, I'm not even speaking of people supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, but even the people mildly criticizing the government don't have any place in the press. And there are some television channels, not only public, even private ones, supported by the Rijal al-Amal, the businessmen, which are really, really terrible. I mean, you can't imagine. There was the other day one guy explaining that the 6th April movement was 70%. Its member was Muslim Brotherhood, and the 30% were paid by foreign countries. I mean, these stupid things must stop.
Okay, Alain.
I'm sorry, I'm obliged to go now.
Okay, Alain Gresh, I'm delighted to have had you talk to us on Inside Story. Thank you very much. Yahya Khanum, what did you make of that arrest when it came out? What did you think about what it suggests about what's happening in Egyptian society right now?
I believe that what happened, and let me start first by extending my own apologies for Mr. Alain for such unfortunate mishappening. But in my view, it is neither an isolated incident, nor definitely it actually reflects a disease in the society and the state. So in my view, it's the thing that happened to Mr. Alain reflects a disease, and the disease didn't start today, yesterday. It started right after Mubarak stepped down.
And it could spread pretty quickly at this rate?
Well, it did spread, actually, and I guess it's all because of the first SCAF, the first military council, which took over right after Mubarak stepped down, when it tried to defame what happened on January 25th, 2011, and trying to picture what happened not as a revolution, but more as a plot, as a conspiracy done by foreign governments to weaken the state in preparation to divide the country.
And
this
of course,
is the literature.
I mean, you were a victim of that. You told me
yes,
that you were.
Actually, the whole thing started practically on the ground by implicating 4 U.S. NGOs and a German one in that infamous bogus case of the NGOs foreign funding. And that was the first step in the counter-revolution, started by the first SCAF. And
again, we're seeing
in doing so, they
NGOs
tried,
at the crosshairs yet again. I mean, people are worried that there's going to be some sort of major clampdown on NGOs under the guise of looking to see where terrorist money is coming.
Definitely, it's coming. It's coming. I can see it clearly. It's coming. But the thing that I wanted to say is that the military, when they started to defame January 25th revolution, they tried to picture it as a foreign conspiracy, and they alleged that the foreign conspiracy was being implemented by foreign NGOs, and in doing so, they waged a campaign, a frenzy, against all foreigners in Egypt. And the rhetoric was, and you can Google it, it's still there, and it's being repeated from time to time. The media, which is controlled by the state, both the state media and the private media controlled by the state, they always try to picture the foreigners in Egypt, either tourists or experts living in Egypt, as spooks.
But how do you get the perfect balance then? Because Egypt is facing extreme security concerns. Militancy is on the rise. We're seeing that in Sinai, in downtown Cairo.
We create militancy. We create militancy by such draconian laws that has been passed over the last year and a half. We make militancy and we create our own Frankensteins. And I believe that they are doing so to serve their own interests of, you know, justifying all these violations of human rights. There's no justification for violations of human rights and hijacking democracy this way. And especially when in doing so, you try to spread xenophobia, and the next thing to xenophobia is chauvinism, and in my view, this is a terrible crime.
Let's just remind us how we got to this point and take a look at how Egypt has changed under President Sisi. There's been a crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood as well as various other groups, as we were talking about, such as the liberal April 6th youth movement. It's left thousands of Egyptians jailed for a year or more now, many of them facing the death penalty. There are signs that Egypt's economy is improving. In October, the credit ratings agency Moody's changed its rating from negative to stable. But soon after that, Egypt suffered the greatest number of deaths from terrorism in a single day. 31 soldiers were killed on October the 24th in an attack in northern Sinai. This provoked a furious reaction from the Egyptian military, and a new law was adopted that will send many civilians to military courts. That's a worrying development, isn't it?
Well, actually, the military are driving wedges within the society by behaving like this or misbehaving like this, and that's why I personally appeal to President Sisi from this platform to stop all these violations.
Seems to be a very short-term view, and I'm going to touch on what you said earlier about how this clampdown on security is backfiring. We're seeing it in the Sinai, in the capital. I mean, if you are imposing these sort of draconian measures on the youth, for example, it could turn them to militancy, couldn't it? I mean, they could see violence as the only way out.
Okay, Jane, let me tell you, I worked as a war correspondent for many years, and I covered wars in Afghanistan. Let me talk about Afghanistan. I've been there during the 90s, the late 90s, and I've seen how young Arab Muslims joined Taliban to fight for so-called Islamic cause. I've seen young Arabs as young as 17 joining Taliban in its war. And they were dying for no cause. The thing that drove those young Arabs to join Taliban was the lack of democracy. They lost any hope for a real future, for any better future. So when you block out all the channels in front of a people, and especially, namely, its youth, you would only end up with more radicalization for big segments of the society, and especially within the youth. If we are sincerely talking about the youth and the need and the necessity to give them hope, we have to reconsider as a state, I'm talking about Egypt, and as a regime, to reconsider all the newly passed laws, draconian laws.
Is it time to call for new elections, so at least there's some sort of parliament to hold them in check?
Well, for me, it would be meaningless to call for elections, even now, under such restrictions on political groups and political parties, and in such atmosphere of imprisonments and arrests and killing. So I believe that the best thing to be done is to stop this terrorism atmosphere, to end this terrorism atmosphere, and to stop trying to create our own Frankenstein to justify even more violations. And then we have to go immediately for real elections. Clean, clear, transparent, and fair. Come to think of it that way, I mean, after all these violations, all the respectable monitoring entities that monitor the elections, they decided to refrain from observing any upcoming elections in Egypt. We need to have a robust monitoring in order to have a valid elections.
So what we have got right now is Sisi with ultimate power. He's given sweeping powers to the military and the police who were so feared and who felt demoralized after the 2011 revolution, as well as community policing. Now this gives citizens the power to arrest people after an 18-month training period. So that's going to only exacerbate what something like Alain experienced, where you've got citizens arresting each other.
Yes, and that's what I meant when I talked about melting down. I mean, this is the way states melt down, and I guess we're on a highway of getting there.
And people, so, excuse me, jumping in here, have been talking about 1984, George Orwell's book about, ultimate power corrupting. And let's talk a little bit more about the concepts of 1984 and whether it is applicable to Egypt. Orwell introduced the term thought crime in his novel. This is the idea that any opposition to the ruling party and its ideas, whether spoken out loud or just thought about, is a crime. The leaders in 1984 carried out surveillance on all its citizens. People are told over and over again, Big Brother is watching you. In one famous passage of the book, Orwell writes, one does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. It seems that the Egyptian rulers could have written that, couldn't they?
Oh, yeah.
What's going to put a stop to this now? You've told me what it is that you feel ought to be done. Who's in a position to do it? It seems that the EU have given up on any idea of sanctions. What about the US, though? Will they ever take a stand?
Well, I believe the West in general have been seriously mistaken since they sidelined themselves during the year that the Morsi, Dr. Mohamed Morsi, was in office. They saw how the opposition were playing heavily with the military, and they could see what was coming. They could have intervened by by advising the conflicting parties in Egypt that they're taking the wrong track, the dangerous track. But they chose to sideline themselves. And I don't know for what reason. Maybe they felt that it would serve their best interest by changing, making such violent change in the regime. Maybe they thought that an undemocratic regime in Egypt would serve their best interest. In my view, they were seriously wrong, and that's what I was telling you about, that if Egypt sunk, God forbid, it will take many countries, especially neighboring countries, right after it.
So then you believe that it is sinking. So why do you think this has been allowed to happen? I mean, if nobody's going to stand up to Egypt?
I believe that some Western countries, they realized the gravity of what they did over the last 3 years. But I also believe that the whole situation in Egypt now has been set on an automatic pilot. I honestly believe that
the US needs Egypt more than Egypt needs the US, other than those billions they get every year in military aid.
Not really, but a big part of what's happening in Egypt is now on the automatic pilot. Of course, there are certain things that could be done to prevent the situation from deteriorating more, and one of the things is for the West to advise. I'm not asking them to tell, to advise, sincerely advise President Sisi that the whole country is going to go down the drain if he chose to carry on that path.
Do you think the UN Council for Human Rights is able to put any sort of pressure on him? I mean, when he addressed the General Assembly some time back, he said that Egypt respects rights and freedoms.
Well, human rights in Egypt, it remains to be a good idea, but it has nothing to do with reality on the ground. And let's admit that. Anybody who would say something otherwise, I would call him or her a hypocrite. Anybody who cannot see the violations on the ground is either blind or hypocrite. So let's face it, the West have chose so far to sideline itself. I guess we need more action rather than the inaction.
Well, the problem is you're not going to get it from inside the country, are you? I mean, it's just routinely just...
I mean, the society...
People are fleeing, there's virtually no opposition. And innocent people, including our journalists, are in jail.
But then again, look at it I look at it that way. I mean, demonstrations haven't stopped since what happened on July 3rd. Actually, it's an amazing thing. I mean, in such poor country, a country that was made poor, by the way, and under such difficult conditions and circumstances, people have been taken out to the streets almost every day. So I believe that if it continued to be like this, side by side...
But there are people who support Sisi, aren't there? There are people who are happy that they've got food on the table, that there's some sort of security, what they perceive as
Definitely.
security.
I mean, this is the normal thing. I mean, in any society, in any country, you would see such division. I wouldn't call it division, but such differences. And this is the amazing thing about the democracy, is that it's the best way to contain such differences, and that's what we have been calling for. What I want to say is that the government and the state, they claim to adopt a liberal approach of economy. You cannot be selective on that, because political liberalism goes hand in hand with economic liberalism. You cannot choose.
Okay, so I'm going to have to jump in here because we've run out of time. But Yahya Khanim, thank you very much for talking to us on Inside Story.
Thank you.
And just remember, you can always add your voice to this discussion. You can leave your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. We are also on Twitter. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story, and mine at Jane Dutton. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye for now.